So he wears many hats and has worn many hats in the area of sports and sports medicine. And we are certainly looking forward to his thoughts on this most important topic in today's world. And if you really follow these sports pages every week or two, you're hearing some new area of interest and controversy in the area of sports medicine and doping. Dr. Ljungqvist.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this introduction. Needless to say that I feel deeply honored to having had this presentation selected as a President's lecture. And I hope to convey to you some important information and am of course ready to respond to any questions that you may have. But let's get started straight away. The lecture's name is Doping's Nemesis, the same title as a book that was published, not written by me, because had I written it, it would not be very readable to the general population, I believe, used as to write scientific articles, as you know. But it's a result of a tape-recorded interviews over many years, which resulted in a book written by a true author. First in Swedish and later in English, and I'll come back to that. But as was mentioned, I was a high jumper, and this is the way we were jumping in those days. This is the way you end a career in that style, which I did in a student's carnival through the streets of Stockholm in May 1953, when I was 21 years old, 22. And was on my way to an international career. I'm probably the first, but then unknown case of jumper's knee. They never got to understand what I had. And I think that particular disorder should have carried my name through the years, but it doesn't. You know, in those days we landed on the same leg as we took off. In my case, the left one. So the knee was destroyed after some kilometers and 200-300 jumps in the asphalt streets of Stockholm. The carnival, of course, ended up in a nice party, so I have some good memories from it, but the bad ones prevail today. Anyway, I have been involved, as was mentioned by Lyle here, for quite a long time in the field of anti-doping. It happened to be actually from the 1970s, early 70s. Based on what Winston Churchill told the Royal College of Physicians in March 1944, the longer you can look back, the further you can look forward. I'm probably the one still around that can look longest back in the history of anti-doping. And therefore, I think I will be able to give a sort of what happens today, to put it in the context of what has happened before. You tend to believe that what you read about today is probably the worst thing you can fancy about doping and anti-doping. I can tell you that's not the truth. It has been worse. And I've been through that, and you will find it during the lecture. Looking back, there are some key years even before I was there. Even before I was born, actually. And unlike what is said in the small text about this lecture in the booklet, this is not really an IOC perspective that I will give you. It's an IAAF perspective, because my main roles were in the IAAF, International Athletics Federation. And it's interesting for me to see that they were actually the first ones to come up with rules related to anti-doping or doping. In 1928 already, the IAAF rules against the use of stimulants were established. They were never really enforced, to my knowledge, and we cannot find any document on it, but they were at least there. There was a signal to the athletes, don't take stuff for the purpose of performance enhancement. In this case, the stimulants, those were the ones known at the time. It was nothing much happened until 1960. At the Rome Olympic Games. I wasn't there, but others were, including some Danish cyclists, one of them dying from heat stroke and combination heat stroke stimulant intake in all likelihood. It was never fully confirmed, but it was a hot cycling road race, a team road race, and it was on a hot day, and they had been given some sort of cocktail, combination of drugs, in all likelihood containing stimulants, amphetamine, perhaps amphetamine-like substances, and vasodilator. And the combination is not good, as you can understand, particularly in a hot climate. And several of the Danish cyclists collapsed, and one died. And he became very famous, of course, because these were the first worldwide live televised Summer Olympic Games. And for public around the world, for people around the world to sit in their dressing rooms seeing an Olympian die was a bit too much for the IOC. They had to do something, and they did. They organized an IOC medical commission with for the sole purpose of coming up with a strategy to combat the use of drugs or performance-enhancing drugs in Olympic sport. They started more or less from scratch, although there were rules already in place since 1928, but not, as I said, not much efficient. And they had started more or less from scratch. It took them 6-7 years to come up with a strategy. And they did so in 1967. And the strategy included a list of banned substances that could not, again, stimulants that were supposed not to be taken by athletes, and the establishment of methods for their detection at the Games. And this was tentatively implemented in the 68 Games, first in Winter Games in Grenoble, and later on in the Mexico Games. And ironically, for me, the first Olympic drug case, doping case, was a Swedish fencer in modern pentathlon who was found with alcohol, which was then banned on Swedish initiative. So that was a bit frustrating for the Swedish team because they lost their bronze medal in the team event because he was part of the team. A sort of Swedish revenge came up because the individual gold medal went to another Swedish man, but that's another story. Anyhow, 68 and 72, there were some tests for stimulants, as I said, but the first real wide, say, comprehensive testing program took place at the Munich Olympic Games in 1972. And that's also when the IAAF created a medical commission. After my own games in 52, I was out of sport until 71 when I came back into the leadership in my home country. And I went as one of the leaders to the 72 Olympic Games, so I was there. And I became involved in the discussions with the creation of the IAAF Medical Commission. And from then on, I moved on together with others in this whole matter of anti-doping. I became formally involved 4 years later, then as council member of the IAAF, and soon after took over the IF Medical Commission. The persons around that were already there was primarily Professor Arnold Beckett, a super scientist from London, was the chief of a doping laboratory, which actually already in London, established at Chelsea College. And Arnold Beckett was one of the giants in metabolism of stimulants, particularly ephedrine and ephedrine-related substances. And he went on as one of the key members of the IOC Medical Commission until he resigned in Barcelona, '92. He was happy to join the IAAF, and so was the leader of the Cologne laboratory, who was the chief of the doping controls at Munich Games, Manfred Donike, because they were both involved in the IOC matters and the IOC Medical Commission, as I've already described. But you can understand that IOC could not do very much. In those days, IOC did have two games every 4 years, winter and summer the same year. And to combat doping, you have to be active the year all around, of course. And that is the responsibility of the individual Olympic federations, if so, and no one did anything. IAAF started. And since I soon became a council member and had a platform, both as a sports leader and as a scientist, Donike and Beckett were happy to join me. And I think it is acknowledged in history that it was we three who, through WLF, started the international anti-doping campaign. And I'm so grateful to both of them, of course, for what they did during the years that they were working. Donike passed away in 1995 on a mission. He died in an airplane on his way to South of Africa to establish an anti-doping laboratory down there. Anyway, some key years during our time of work, early phase, the IOC did not include anabolic steroids in their list because they did not, the philosophy was not to include substances or methods that could not be tested for. Although steroids was known to have been around since late 50s, possibly earlier, we don't know exactly, but certainly since 50s, and known to have been administered to athletes in 1968, when actually a coach from a particular country was sent home because he was injecting steroids into an athlete. So this was known since 10, 15 years or more. But it was not on the list. We posted on the list in 1974 and established the methods for its analysis through Raymond Brooks in London, a good friend of Arnold Beckett. It was an immunologically based method. It was tested first time at the European Championships in Rome in 1974, and that paved the way for IOC to improve the method and bring it into use at the 76 Olympic Games when the first steroid cases appeared. We also noticed that we needed to have very sophisticated laboratory systems in place because these are not just routine chemical analysis that we are talking about. A positive result has tremendous effects and implications, and you have to be absolutely 100% sure that this sole evidence really holds in a court. So under the leadership of Beckett and Donike, the IAAF established laboratory accreditation scheme, which is now routine under the WADA leadership, as you probably all know. But it was started by IAAF as long ago as in 1979. IOC became very interested in it because they wished other sports to use the same system and the same laboratory methods for their work and encourage them to do what IAAF did in terms of anti-doping activities. So IOC and IAAF made a joint agreement in 1981 that we accredited laboratories together to have the IOC sign and stamp put on our accreditations certificate was important to us because after all, the IOC is a bigger body in the sports world than IAAF. So throughout a period of 5 years, the laboratories were accredited one after the other, jointly by IAAF and IOC until IOC took over in 1986. We also had a number of cases that went to court. As I said, the laboratory results had to stand firmly on their own, and they were challenged. And we faced several court cases during those periods. And I can tell you, we were not popular. Neither in public opinion nor in top sports leadership. But we had reached pretty far. So it was a bit too late at that stage to stop us. But the message in those days, around mid-80s, were clear. Okay, good what you are doing, but make sure you don't create any scandals. That was the message even from top sports leadership. So it was not an easy environment to work in, I can tell you. Particularly when it became quite clear that certain countries had state-based organized doping schemes for their athletes. We all know about GDR example today. And to work in an atmosphere like that was not that easy. But West was not much better, and I will come to that. We therefore organized an arbitration panel to have at our assistance if cases come up. so that we could at least tell courts that we had made a proper evaluation of each case, should they then go further to court. This was mimicked by IOC. There was a little of a competition between IIWF and IOC at the time, because IIF had a very prominent leadership, which was really competing with IOC leadership in popularity and importance. When we created an arbitration panel, IOC was the year after there to create their own Court of Arbitration for Sport. Within the parentheses, there are other years, 1985 and 86 respectively. That depends upon the fact that it took 2 or 3 years for each of those bodies to be established, recognized, and confirmed by the relevant authorities in the countries concerned. In the case of IWF in England, because we are headquartered there in London, and in the case of CAS in Switzerland. As you know, CAS today is a recognized recognized supreme body for solving conflicts in sport, recognized by the Federal Court in Switzerland, which is very important. So the IOC took over the laboratory accreditation as from 1986, I already mentioned, and we were working, and for me it was very important to show that, I mean, my country was not clean at all. I made a survey back in 1970s about the use of the steroids. It is still the only one from that time, although it was just a brief report in British Journal of Sports Medicine. I think it appeared in 1975. I presented it at a Congress, which showed that in 1973, about at least 1/3 of the Swedish top 10 athletes in athletics in each event were using steroids, probably more. But it was allowed. It was allowed until 1974. So this was a disease on its way, a cancerous disease on its way into sport at the time. And I had to make sure, in order to be credible in an international work, together with Donike and Beckett, to show that I also wish to clean at home. And that resulted in a very famous drama in my country, not interesting to you perhaps, but when I launched a anti-doping program in Swedish sport, the Swedish national team in athletics asked for my resignation. And it became a great scandal in the newspapers, and that was back in 1977. Ironically, that petition that went through the Swedish national team was on the occasion of a country match between Sweden and GDR, in GDR. But, so, some funny experiences I do have. Anyway, we created finally a Nordic convention based on the initiatives that we had taken, and I must say, so that you know this from the outset, one of the countries that were joining very quickly, Sweden, and what I thought should be done was Norway. And Norway is still very much ahead in terms of anti-doping, and have an extremely good anti-doping organization in the country since a very long time. We managed to get the Finns and the other Nordic countries on our side and organized a Nordic convention, which made it possible for us to test all the Nordic athletes at any time, even out of competition, as from 1986. Not until years later did this come as an international requirement. So we were ahead, and that was good for us who were working from the Nordic point of view in the international anti-doping field. This Nordic convention has been recognized by the previous IOC president as a pre-runner of WADA. The first international convention in anti-doping was this one. We were working in a very hot, tough climate, as I said, and not very popular. We felt it very clearly. It was, for those who have read the famous Czech author Kafka and some of his novels, where Mr. K is accused for having done something he doesn't know what he's actually accused for. He knows there is an enemy out there. He don't know who it is and what he's doing. We had the same feeling. We were very nicely met by people officially, but that something was going on behind us, which we couldn't really touch upon. But we insisted and we persisted. And I say we because I was not alone, but we were some strong scientists who did the work. And we persisted, and then the big drama happened in 1988 in Seoul. There is no question this changed the anti-doping world completely, the Ben Johnson affair, which became a national drama for Canada. I know there are Canadians in the hall, and you probably know that there is there was then at least a law in the country which made it possible for the government, I believe, to establish an extraordinary panel with extraordinary measures and possibilities, and hear witnesses under oath, even people from abroad. So this to find the world's best athlete. That was the feeling at the time, perhaps still is, I don't know, but certainly then, that the 100-meter gold medalist at the Olympic Games on the men's side is recognized to be the #1 athlete. That was the case then. And particularly in view of the enormous expectations that were prevailed in those days, who will win, Carl Lewis or Ben Johnson? And then Ben Johnson wins by 1.5 meters, at least 1 meter, and on a new world record time. And then the night after, I get a paper under my doorstep. And when I came back with my wife after dinner and unfolded the paper, and I was told Ben Johnson's A sample is positive, and my wife probably saw that I reacted a little. So she asked, "What is that?" And I had to say nothing particular. But I knew what it was. And it exploded the following day, as you all know. And this changed the world, because then finally did the international sports leadership understand this cannot go on. This is too much. And that the credibility of Olympic sports is at stake. It's interesting, for me, since I'm here to tell you some anecdotes from the horse's mouth, so to say, it's interesting that we had a president at the time. I can name him, an Italian, Primo Nebbiolo. He was the #2 in sports leadership world, next to Samaranch, no question about that. He was the only one that Samaranch really not feared, but respected to such an extent that they were the top. And he loved to appear in front of media, of course. The day this exploded, and he and I was staying at the same hotel in Seoul, he asked me to join his car down to the press conference. The announcement was made in the morning by IOC press officers that Ben Johnson had tested positive, and the case is now with IAAF. They will have a press conference later in the morning, 2 hours later. And that's where the whole world's media was. And on the way down in the car, Nebbiolo, to my surprise, said, "Arne, this press conference you take." Wow. 5 minutes advance. It's something I remember. You can understand. And I could go on for 45 minutes with just that conference, but one outcome was so many questions, and so many rhetoric questions, the chronicle one being, isn't this the death of Olympic competitive sport? And I said, I think exactly the opposite. This is the big chance for sport and sports leadership to wake up and understand what is going on and where we are heading if nothing be done. So we got the change, a clear change in climate. During those years, I told you already, and I'll come back to that, West and East were just as bad. East were better, not better, but worse. Or I don't know the word. They were organized in a way which West was not. But so it is. Then, soon after Seoul, the Cold War faded. There is no question that Olympic sport and sports successes was part of the political program in East. And that also indirectly became in West. So the Cold War was waged on the sporting grounds as well. And we notice this so clearly. And of course, the fading of the Cold War, the the dramatic political changes in Europe, 89 and during the years that came, helped us as well. Because this became not such a big issue any longer. And with the Seoul event and the Cold War disappearance more or less together made the situation much easier during the 1990s. And continuously it improved. And very much media and public opinion was helpful in understanding this is a must to do away with this evil of doping. We got, against all odds, the authorization to start to conduct out-of-competition testing worldwide, started in IAAF. It was an impossible idea during the 80s. It would be an interference with the human rights, with the individual integrity. That was the argument when I launched this in Sweden in 81. Norway and Sweden started out-of-competition testing in 81 and argued for 10 years to have it implemented in international sport. No way. Now, yes. Now. So in 1990, IAAF Congress took a rule on out-of-competition testing and started the blood sampling in 93, which was also impossible for cultural and religious reasons, it was said during the 1980s, which we proved was not true, because we tested it at the big athletics galas, which is nowadays called the Diamond League. But we started blood sampling, we did it, and the athletes started to become happy. So through the 90s, the situation totally changed, and we got the public opinion with us, we got the political establishment with us, we had a rule chaos, because different federations had different anti-doping rules, particularly with respect to penalties. A cyclist could be caught with steroids after the race and be penalized by a punishment to pay $100 and then go on cycling the next day. Whereas a track and field athlete would be banned for 4 years for the same offense. After the Ben Johnson case, IAAF actually increased the penalty for steroid use from 2 to 4 years. We had to go back after some few years because courts did not accept that, but that's a different story. But we cannot have so different rules in different sports and also in different countries. There were different rules. An athlete, a track and field athlete with steroid in one country could be banned for half a year and in another country for 4 years. So we approached, Nebbiolo approached Samaranch and the IOC in a completely new atmosphere of support and understanding and said, we need governmental help. We cannot do this alone. There also happened the Festina affair, and some of you know it. Professional cyclists, the Tour de France, when the French police interfered into the dormitories of the Festina cycling team and found doping substances. France already had a rule that criminalized this. And this became a major scandal. I don't go into all these details, just remind you, and some of you certainly remember all this. Another scandal which also provoked some action to be taken was the Rome laboratory. We discovered, because we in IAAF, we in IOC, I was then member of the IOC Medical Commission since 1987, we were governing the laboratories, and we found that the Rome laboratories were taking lots of samples and analyzing them. They never reported anything positive. Never, I wouldn't say, but so much lower than all the others. And they were proud of saying that we are testing in particular Italian football to such an extent. And we wondered why? Why don't they find anything? So a search was being done, and it was found that yes, they had taken the samples, but they had not analyzed them. Very simple to get them negative. So this major scandal broke out, which resulted in Rome laboratory losing its accreditation, of course. The leadership of the Italian Olympic Committee was dismissed, and a completely new structure was organized in Italy. the Italian Olympic Committee was probably the richest Olympic committee in Europe, probably in the world. They became now a body like any other Olympic committee in any other country. So this was a major, major scandal. And in the midst of all this chaos that existed during 1998, the president himself unfortunately made some unfortunate comments, or at least comments that were not so favorably interpreted by media, as if he was lenient with doping and dopers. So he finally found it much better to do what we were asking for, namely to convene a meeting with the governments around the world. And so we did in 1998, and in 1999 WADA was born, which is such an important step in the fight against doping, that the political establishment around the world says this is not acceptable. To get there from where we started in 1970s, it was unbelievable, but it's a fact. So WADA, as you know, is 50% governments around the world. All governments participate, no exception, and 50% governments and 50% Olympic movement. The budget is not big, about $30 million per year, $15 million from each party, but at least it is something. And it's a regulatory body that makes sure that the anti-doping activities are okay around the world. And now they have found, we see, they have found that they are not okay in some countries. And that is what the chaos today, or the drama today, is about. So this is a great step in the right direction, and WADA is there to stay. I became a member of WADA from the start. The IWF was very much behind it. But now I'm coming over to some anecdotes. I think you wish to hear what actually happened during these years, so that you can understand better what is going on now and why and how it really is, and make your own evaluation. This is nothing new that we are experiencing today. Not at all. I can tell you, US was not the best. My God. We had enormous problems with IWF with US during the 1980s and 90s, with the US lawyers in particular, who took the side of the athletes who we found doped. And one story, which is very crucial, happened in Sydney Olympic Games, when we, IWF, and I was then chairman still of the IWF Medical Committee, and my successor later, Juan Manuel Alonso, is sitting here and listening to me. I hope he learned from this lesson. That we were suspicious vis-à-vis many countries, including US. And we found that by cross-checking information that we had from laboratories and that we had got from United States Athletics Federation, USATF, when we cross-checked them, and saw the list of participants in the US team, we understood that there were doped athletes in the US Olympic team in Sydney. And this became known just before the Games by media. And just before the Games, media are searching for sensations. Once the Games get started, they concentrate on what is actually going on in the battlefields. But before, they are searching for other things. And this came up as a big story. And I always treat media in a respectful way. And I do that, for goodness sake. It's tell them the truth. So I told them the truth. I had told, yes, we have suspicions that there are doped athletes in the US Olympic team. And the US team leaders became, of course, very angry with me. There was not much written about it in European newspapers. I don't think so. I didn't hear much during in Sydney time but I heard from Europe. But I got a telephone call, believe it or not, from the White House when in Sydney. Not from the president himself, for sure not. But it's high enough to tell me that we have heard and we have read your comments about the United States Olympic team. And we wish to let you know that we have understood that you are probably right. And we will do something. So if you could have that, keep that in mind when you give further comments, which I did. That's a nice way, nice cooperation. And what did they do? They already understood, because of the IF problems that we had had through the 90s with the USATF, that they had to do something and move the responsibility for anti-doping out of sport. And that's what they were already on the way of doing. And in 2001, I think it was, USADA was created, which dramatically changed the situation in the United States, dramatically. And they have done a wonderful job since then. Talking about the Russian experience today, and the lesson I had with them about the same time, had they done the same thing, the world had looked different, but they didn't do it. US did. The first proof that I was right came in Sydney, when the world record holder and world champion in shot put, then married with Marriott Jones, Charles J. Hunter, organized a press conference saying, I am one of them, and handed over his accreditation and went home. Then there was a long story with some further American athletes, one in particular named Jerome Young, who was part of the 4x400 relay team who won the gold medal. And he was later found, the USATF refused to give any details on the athlete. We knew there was one. We didn't know who was doped, who had taken steroids, who had a positive sample. They refused to give us the information. It was digged up by an American journalist. And this was Jerome Young after the games. It became a long story in CAS. But it's ironical again, and it shows what world is like. I mean, Jerome Young, once he was found and identified, it was also found that he had been part in the relay 4x400, as I mentioned, in the heats. The US team won the gold. IAAF took the gold away from the team. USATF went to CAS and got reinstated because Jerome Young did not participate in the final, only in the preliminaries. We were saying, but my goodness sake, they qualified for the final with a doped athlete in the team. Where is the logics? CAS is not always logic. Lawyers, sorry. But it was not the first time and not the last either. But ironically again, some few years later, a member of the final team, Antonio Pettigrew, who is now passed away, confessed that he had doped as a member of the final. Then the medals were taken away from the US team without discussion, of course. So it was okay in the end. Further examples, it's often being said that those who wish to dope and try to dope are ahead of us. That was true long time ago and for a long time. I would say it's not today. I insist it's not today. Our scientists are better than their scientists. It would be surprising if not. We have the top people in our 31 accredited laboratories around the world. There are some who can manipulate. They will be discovered, like happened in Balco. One example that we were on their heels came in Salt Lake City in 2002 when 2 Russians and 1 Spanish-German skier were found doped with the latest generation of EPO. It was very latest generation because it had been on the market in certain countries only for a few months. So probably those people believed that we had no method for it, but they were mistaken because we had. We had been cooperating with the producer, Amgen, in Seattle. And I remember very well when Don Catlin, who was responsible for the laboratory in Salt Lake City, sent a mail with a result, analytical result to Amgen, and got a reply back saying, yes, that is our molecule. Then it was. And the people were, of course, disqualified and sent home. But it was the first time where we could show that we are on your heels, so be careful. And then we got further measures that could do it better. The Balco affair I already mentioned. This was an underground laboratory that was found in Bay Area, called Bay Area Laboratory, that produced designer steroids for elite athletes around the world. And this came to be known. This is, again, a nice story. This became known. My God. No. Oh, okay. This became known when I was in Paris already, because we had the World Championships in athletics in Paris. And I got a telephone call from Terry Madden, the then chief of USADA, saying, I have a hot story, and I've been allowed to talk to you about it. Can I come to Paris? He didn't want to speak on telephone. Yes, I said, but me, I mean, I have a president. No. I've been authorized by FBI and Justice Department to talk only to you. That did not feel nice. So I said, but knowing I'm host here in the United States, but knowing the American legal system, I felt uncomfortable and said, can I at least bring a lawyer with me? Yes, you can. So we met Terry Madden and his people outside in a suburb of Paris, and I and the IWF lawyer. And we got the following message that they had discovered in a taxation Russia, an underground laboratory that was serving the world elite athletes with designer drugs for the purpose of performance enhancement, a steroid with a slightly chemical manipulation that would make them impossible to detect with the routine analysis. And we are on our way to identify this substance. So therefore, we wish you to keep all the samples, even negative ones, now in Paris, because the world elite of athletics was there, to keep all the samples, even those that are negative, so that we can analyze them later. This was not an easy message to get through to the laboratory, because they would immediately start to wonder why keeping the negative ones, because that was not the routine at the time. Today it is. So I had to, but I knew this charming gentleman who was chief of the French laboratory, full of humor and a nice man. So I told him, please, I have a suggestion, that you keep all the samples, even the negative ones, until further notice, and don't ask me why. And then he said, yes, Arne, I'll keep all the samples until further notice, and I will not ask you why. So, French humor. And we did find Dwayne Chambers amongst others, and this was part of the plan organized by USADA to find out what was really done in the Balco laboratory, who were the clients, what was the distribution, and all details around that. And they solved this problem in a brilliant way, and that I think was the first USADA mission that was showed the competence of the people that had taken over, and we could start to trust the United States. But there were still problems with the USATF. I'm sorry to tell you all these negative things, because in Paris, one other thing happened which still shows how difficult this was. There was an American female sprinter named Kelly White who won both gold in 100 and 200. And was found with a stimulant which was not on the list, named modafinil, which is clearly banned under the umbrella paragraph of similar substances. So we identified her, and it was a drug that is being given sometimes to people who have a tendency to fall asleep, so-called narcolepsia. Have you heard about that? I believe you have. And the USATF brought forward a certificate signed by a doctor from a clinic in California, stating that he was treating her and her family because of narcolepsia, and claimed that this should be accepted. And then our response, of course, was then she should have asked for therapeutic use exemption, of course, which he hadn't done. So we insisted and went further, and there was a major controversy between USATF and us. And the certificate. I mean, 3 years later, Kelly White changed her mind, came to WADA and gave a witness. She had never had narcolepsia. She had never heard of the doctor. She had never had any family relation with narcolepsy or anything. So, I mean, if our friends in the federations do not help us in doing the difficult job that we were trying to do, you can imagine that was not an easy thing. And this is as late as 2003. I was told by my friend in the United States, member of the IOC Council, that this particular doctor had been punished later on according to the local paragraph and local law in California. I didn't follow this up. It was history for me. It only showed to me what may be around and how difficult it is. But that was, I would say, the last sign of problems with the United States. But I think for you, many Americans here, it's interesting to know that it's not so long ago that we didn't have the full cooperation with sporting world. Today we have. The Athens Games was another story. My watch is going fast. Was another story. I found a few days ago the Olympic torch from Athens at home. Since Roger became chairman of during Roger's time, we all IOC members got one torch from each Olympic Games as a souvenir. I asked my insurance company about it. They say they are worth something like $2,000 each. So that's not bad. But they are worth they have other values to us. This torch was used in it's the envelope of the torch. The torch was supposed to be carried into the stadium and the flame lit by the hero from Sydney Games, a Greek hero from Sydney Games, Kenteris, who won the 200 meters. But he and his female friend, another sprinter named Tanu, they were chased for outer competition testing just before the games and were not found where they should have been, repeatedly over again. And finally, I got a message when I was already in Athens that now they had checked in at the Olympic Village. Fine, I said, good, now we take them. So we took them there. No, they had gone. The message had gone, apparently, quickly. So they escaped from the village. And 2 hours later, I got a message. They are in hospital. A motorcycle accident in Athens, and they are hospitalized. You may have heard of this story. It was not nice for us. The two Greek heroes, one of them expected to bring the flame into the stadium and lit the flame. The torch in the stadium and lit the flame. This took over the whole media attention during the days running up to the games. And I felt so sorry for the Greeks who had done so much to make this a real festival. Olympic Games in Greece is quite something, and destroyed by their own. It was shame. It's a real honor for the Greek people that they took our side against the athletes, and they felt shameful. And of course, what happened in the long run was that there was no accident. It was clarified by Greek police, and prosecution followed in Greece. They had escaped simply, and we asked them to, because the protocol is as follows, that we have to hear them before we can punish them. And the hearing panel was actually headed by today's IOC president, Thomas Bach, who is a lawyer. And they were waiting for the athletes to appear, to recover in the hospital from the said accident, and then give a witness. And they refused. So finally, an ultimatum was given saying, if you don't come this and that day, on this and that hour, we will take a decision without hearing you. Then they came, fully healthy, saying nothing, handed over their accreditations and left. No participation, of course, in the games. So this was the outcome on the spot. Later on, they were disqualified from sports point of view, from competition, and never heard of again. And there was a prosecution. I don't exactly know the result of it, but it was a civil rights prosecution because they had violated Greek laws. This is what we found in Athens in a Hungarian thrower. This is a way of producing clean urine. It was preloaded, the little syringe, the ampulla with a clean urine. The right part of it, the balloon, was introduced into the rectum, and this little cord under the penis with a valve. So it was a very cleverly adapted small machine that produced the right urine. Of course, the end then was the blind end, not the syringe. But we got the suspicion and finally recovered this. And we asked one of the both athletes to come back, which they didn't do for a new sample. And therefore, they were both disqualified. Ironically, one of them, they put, this balloon through the anus into the rectum. And one of the athletes' names was Anus. So it's, you can go to the history book and you'll find it. Not guilty. Right. So it's, people are incredible. Of course, what WADA quickly did was to establish common rules for the whole world of sport. And this is, I can't see my watch really. Tell me if I go too far here. The WADA code was created in record time. And the government did their job as well. This was against many odds, I would say, to produce a common rules for every sport based on the cows that we had early on, as you can understand. And there were 3 federations that were a bit resistant. And then IOC really took a firm and courageous decision saying that those sports that do not accept this code before the Athens Games will not be part of the Games. And the last to accept the code were cycling, tennis, and FIFA. The 3 expected ones. But they came on board. That's an example of what you can do if you wish to do something and you are courageous enough for doing it. And the government did their homework, and they produced a document, a convention under UNESCO. I mean, United Nations membership are behind this. And they produced this to support the anti-doping fight as presented under the code. And I will go on a little bit quickly and come to Beijing Games, because there we have the history today about the Russians, which is important. This is not new. The same happened in Beijing. Well before Beijing, Beijing athletics part, a number of Russian female athletes were found to have delivered the same urine under the IF anti-doping program. And DNA analysis confirmed that this was one and the same urine from 6-7 different persons. Cannot happen. So they were disqualified. And I was commenting on it at the press conference that you can see here. The General Secretary of the Beijing Games, the General Director of the media of IOC, and I in the middle. And I gave comments on this, saying that this sounds like organized doping in Russia. And of course the Russians were not happy, but I said what I thought. And I was echoed the year after by the president of the Biathlon Federation, who said the same thing when Russian biathletes were found doped in Pyeongchang World Championships in his sport. Coming back, has this at all been meaningful? Well, people believe that what we're seeing today is maybe an escalation of doping activities. I say no. We have no good statistics, but we have examples from practical life. If you compare, steroids are still the most frequently used doping substances. And we have possibility to compare events that have not changed in terms of implement and other things, but perhaps should have been changing in terms of results. I think Seoul Games were the most contaminated ones, or during the 1980s. I shouldn't pick out particular games. If you look at the results, it turns out that London, 24 years later, the results are much less at the podium than in Seoul 24 years earlier. And it's not just by accident, it's women and men all over. And the difference is more than significant. This is not scientific study. This is not statistics, of course, but it's practical life. You see it. And if you go to DISCUS, which is also an event that has not changed, the only gold medalist in throwing events in London would have placed second, namely the gold medalist in London's DISCUS. All the others would have been out of the podium, way behind the others. And it is the same for hammer. Women's hammer did not exist in Seoul. So I will finish, because I'm out of time here, by simply stating to you that progress has been made since 1970s. Clean athletes are strongly against. The world is strongly against. Public opinion against doping. It is zero tolerance on behalf of IOC. But what we don't know is the prevalence, the importance, how widespread is this? And we need to have more facts on that. And looking forward in the spirit of Churchill, what can I see for the future? Well, probably the quality of cheating is increasingly sophisticated. The report from the laboratory chief, who has now escaped to California, the Sochi laboratory chief, who reported that with the aid of security people in Sochi, they were drilling holes through the laboratory wall to exchange contaminated or positive samples for negatives. I mean, this is a good idea for a Hollywood director to pick up and make a movie out of it. And new doping technologies will develop. We don't know about gene doping yet. May not be there. I doubt it. But with gene editing coming up as a fantastic method, medical-wise, we may have problems in the future. And we need increased resources, increased legislation, and in the end, public health needs to be addressed, because that's where we are today. In a country like most of yours who are sitting here, I would say that the use of doping substances is probably more problematic in society as such and among the young people than it is by elite athletes. The elite athlete doping issues have been addressed by sports authorities since 40 years. Practically no country has taken firm action against the wide misuse of doping substances in the young population, in the fitness atmosphere that we have around the world today. I had a conference finally in 2012 as an 80th birthday present from my government, from International Olympic Committee, and from Swedish Sport. In 2011, I celebrated my 80th birthday. I was given a seminar, an international seminar, which was staged 2012 in Stockholm. And the book came out a week ago. And I found this in the booth of Routledge down here. And it's called Doping and Public Health, which is a summary of the conference that we had in 2012. And I leave you with this message. Be hopeful with respect to elite sport. Be critical with respect to what the society is doing in terms of combating the use of doping substances in society. Thank you.